appreciate you inviting me here, and particularly given that I'm having my 15 minutes of fame, that it's a local visit instead of having to get on an airplane to do this talk. I'm going to talk about recent history, starting with recent history. The type is too small for you all to read, but that's okay. This is, I assume that you all are here because you know something about the electric industry. So you should already know this. It will be on the quiz. Not mine, but one that one of your professors will give you. Just a reminder for the context for where we are today. In the 1990s, there was restructuring. Renewable energy production tax credits were created. Texas created the first renewable production standard, portfolio standard. In the 2000s, we had the creation of RTOs and ISOs, growth of merchant generation, and competition started the first gas steam plants closing. 2003 blackouts, start of fracking, drop in gas prices, wind and PV expand, electric demand starts flattening, temperatures get hotter every year, by the way, starting in the 90s, average temperatures. In the 2010s, the Obama administration continued all of the environmental regulations that were started first adopted by Congress and implemented in the Bush administration. Coal and nuclear plants retired faster, climate warming continued, and in April of 2017, Rick Perry, the new Secretary of Energy, wrote a memo to the staff of the Department of Energy saying, oh my God, the sky is falling. Coal and nuclear plants are dropping like flies. Clearly renewable energy, well, unspecified subsidized resources are causing this, as well as burdensome environmental regulations. Write a report explaining all of this, and then in late May, the Department of Energy hired me to do this because nobody inside DOE could figure out how to do it. So by context, that report finally came out in the end of August 2017, and in the end of September, there was a proposed rule that the Department of Energy sent over to my alma mater, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that said, let's subsidize all the merchant coal and nuclear plants. So that brings you to where we are today. Why did they have their shorts in the knot? Power plant retirements. This is actual power plant retirements. 132 gig retired between 2002. This is DOE data that showed 2002 to 2022. You will notice that there were 59 gigawatts of coal that retired. Coal on the top stack is the gray. Here's a tip for people preparing reports. Always make sure that your production staff does consistent colors for the same thing across every graph, or you go crazy. So coal is always gray, and natural gas plants will always be blue in these graphics and across the report. And for you students in the room, go get a copy of Edward Tuffy, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. You cannot write a competent analysis with that. Okay, so back to the plan. 59 gig of coal retired, 51 gig of natural gas plants retired, and 5 gig of nuclear plants retired. Notice that although the administration was very worried about the closure of coal and nuclear plants, they apparently didn't notice that the same number of nuclear plants had crashed, nor did they care why. The maximum year for coal retirements was 2015, and that was the max compliance deadline. Mercury and air toxic standard implementation deadline for cleaning up plants or shutting them down. So this may sound like a lot of plants, dead bodies all over the place, but in point of fact, by 2017, we still had almost 1.2 thousand gig. I'm not really good at scaling up all the zeros. A whole lot of capacity left in 2017. Because we had had so much significant build of natural gas and of renewable generation. And although they were concerned about how diversity was being diminished because of all of the coal and nuclear plant closures, as the top row was, of these pie charts is energy and capacity. And as you can see, diversity in terms of just the different colors in the pie charts. The first is 2017. Sorry, these kind of got scrambled in actual production. So that what these are different years, and so the first one on the far left is 2002, and the last one is 2017. So as you can see, the diversity of the fleet in terms of both generation and capacity has increased. If you want to look at these in more loving detail, they're in the DOE staff report. So a reminder, DOE's rationale for hand-wringing over the power plant retirements was that the high level, this is what their stated concerns were, the high level of recent, quote, premature, quote, baseload nuclear plant retirements due to burdensome environmental regulation and unfair subsidies excuse me, to other generation technologies. This would be causing a less diverse generation mix. The loss of these plants would reduce grid reliability and resiliency, particularly because of the loss of fuel on site. And these plants provide resiliency, which is something that was not defined, and rotating mass-based inertia that's valuable for grid operation. They kept talking about inertia without ever grasping what it meant, so we're going to talk about that as well. So let's talk about the causes of, this is what we actually found. By we, I mean that there was a giant army of people within the Department of Energy and outside whom I was calling to provide information. And all of the data came directly from the Energy Information Administration. And one of the important things to do, another tip for students and analysts, is always use a consistent time span. And always design that time span to contain all of the relevant data points. So in this case, although DOE's initial focus was 2011 through 2015, 2016, because my God, that's when all the plants are closing. In fact, I believe that it was important to go all the way back to 2002, to the start of the time when competition actually began working across the United States. So when you look at that larger time span, and when you collect a whole lot of data that is laid out in 184 pages of a report that you can access online, I found, that there were a number of causes, 4 principal causes. The root causes, which were so obvious that nobody actually even printed them until I did a month after the report came out, are that wholesale electric competition actually works. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. It forces inefficient plants to close and get out of the way so that new, more efficient assets can come in and serve us. Second, the coal plants that retired were old and inefficient, and the nuclear plants that retired were higher cost and, quote, troubled. Troubled is a euphemism for those suckers are broke and it costs too much to fix them. Other causes, low natural gas prices. You all, I'm sure, know, this being Texas and the University of Texas, that natural gas prices were at least 2/3 below by 2009, 2010, where they had been only less than a decade before. Flattening demand for electricity, all of the high costs of fuel combined with decades of investment in energy efficiency combined with the recession that we had in 2008, 2009, 2010 had essentially a permanent effect. They all kicked in and caused the pattern of demand for electricity to finally shut down, flatten. And what that means is expensive plants have nowhere to hide. We had always, in this industry, built the next plant. You know, we all were assuming at one point in time 6 to 7% annual energy growth. Then we went down to, well, it'll only be 2 or 3%. That's still a whole lot of room on the supply curve for expensive plants to have a home. But when you have flat demand, the tide's going out and you can see who's naked and costly. And those are the ones that shut down. Exacerbating factors, but non-causes of retirements were that renewables are forcing more and more cycling and ramping. The whole grid moves faster today. In the time frame that we were looking at, I don't personally believe renewables forced any power plant retirements. Today, they certainly are having more of a significant effect. But environmental regulations raise costs on non-competitive plants, and what they did is essentially force a retirement deadline. So that a lot of the plants were cleaned up before the deadline because they were cost effective to do so, even under what were finally grasped to be permanently low natural gas prices. But if you had an expensive power plant and it was going to be too expensive to clean it up and still be competitive, you turn to a different strategy. How many of you are from the business school here? Okay, that strategy is called milking the cash cow. Run that sucker until get the absolute every last megawatt hour you can out of it. Don't make any improvements, shut it down at the last possible minute, and that's the strategy for why. That is why so many plants closed in 2015. A couple of illustrations. This too will be incomprehensible unless you look at it on the DOE report itself. What I did was have everybody stratify. We picked 4 time sequences, time chunks, over this period that mattered. The period of restructuring, economic recession in shale gas, and the start of the announcement of what all the regulations were, the low electric demand max deadline, sort of hardcore environmental regulation, and 2016 on. And then had plotted all of the power plant retirements by both region and by fuel. And what this very clearly shows is the types of plants, so it also shows capacity and ownership. If you were really close to the screen, you could tell all that. So this is something that we put a lot of thought and love into, and it's worth studying. If you do that, you figure that, gosh, wholesale competition caused a whole lot of plants to close in 2002, 2006. They were all small plants. Most of them were natural gas steam, because new natural gas technology is so much more cost effective. Cost 2, the coal plants that retired were old. This sorts all of the coal plants that retired by region, which is the vertical spaces, by age at the time of retirement, which is the scale on the horizontal axis, by color is the nuclear plant. Color is the type of fuel, and size is, gosh, plant size. And merchant versus vertically integrated utility ownership. So what this shows is, again, all of the dark dots, all of the early plants that closed were merchant and natural gas steam. Gosh, they were old, they were tired, they were inefficient. Even if they weren't old, they were not competitive. They should have been shut down. And a lot of those happened, most of the early retirements, all of the ERCOT retirements. ERCOT is the third from the bottom. That's all that nice line of blue triangles. ERCOT, natural gas plants that couldn't compete because we are the place where everybody wants to build a new gas plant. All the coal plants that closed, the average age of those coal plants was in the 40s, 50s. Actually, the average age was in the 50s. These suckers had earned their and a lot of them, look, some of these are out to 65, 70 years old. They had earned their AARP cards. It was time for them to go home. I too am getting mail from AARP. So the fact that these plants, and most of them are very small, by the way. If you see large green dots, those were broken nuclear plants. So what this tells you is when you actually look at the data, the surprise is more of the plants didn't close. But very clearly, there's a reason. These are all small coal plants. And they're old coal plants, and they're highly inefficient, and by the way, the older a coal plant gets, the more inefficient it gets and the more downtime it has. And they are no longer baseload generation. Baseload is not a type of a plant, it's an operational scheme. And it means you run with limited ramping for a long period of time. Like a nuclear plant, you want to turn it on, crank the dial to 100% and walk away. And then you come back 16 months later and refuel it. It is not a class of generators. And premature retirement, there is no such thing. I think you would be hard-pressed to say that the First Energy Samus plant, which I believe is now 58 years old, is premature. If it were to retire, which it's doing next year, if First Energy Solutions doesn't find a way to bail it out. Premature is in the eye of the beholder. If you're the mayor of the town, where workers are going to be put out of business, if you are the spouse of a miner or a teacher or a store owner in a town where there are lots of people who work in a coal mine or a power plant, it's premature. If you are the shareholder of a power plant that is going to close, that you can't keep milking for additional cash, you probably think that's premature. But if you're the market, and just a reminder, we're Texas, we believe in competitive markets. If you're the market, things don't generally happen prematurely, they happen when they're supposed to. More definitions. Reliability, how am I doing for time? Good.
Alison, how did you get into writing? And because when you take the writing that you have and to be able to make it to where policymakers can understand it, that is an art. Can you talk a little bit about your journey in writing
My journey in writing starts with analysis, and analysis starts with figuring out what are the questions you need to answer. Because the questions that need to be answered are not necessarily the questions that you are asked to address. So the first step is what are the proper questions, and the next step is what are all of the facts, not just the proper facts, but all of the relevant facts. And then you put together an analysis, and then and you have to put a lot of effort into understanding what are the correct ways to serve the questions with analysis that is legitimate and facts that are relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the ways to look critically at every conclusion that you reach. And it is, I am, part of the way I process information most effectively is through visual stuff, such as not just, you have to do mathematical analysis often in an industry as technical as energy, but often you can portray and test relationships far more effectively through visual displays and by just plotting out stuff. And all of the analyses that I have ever done are very visual dominant in terms of graphs, in terms of maps, in terms of time sequences, in terms of how do you dice and slice things in different ways. And it's only after you get all that stuff figured out and reach the right conclusions and test them that writing ever becomes an issue for me. And so writing is the way for me to explain what all the analyses were and what the proper conclusions are, and to make sure people understand what the end point is. The process of the analysis is less important than the ending place, but the end point needs to be clear and focused and concise so that people do not doubt, that do not harbor needs to be so clear that people don't think that you made stuff up or you moved things around or cherry-picked the data in order to reach the conclusions. The writing needs to lay it all out in a clear fashion.
Do you have what is your emotional connection to when you present something, as you just did, and the policymakers just don't seem to pay attention to it in the way for all the work that you have done?
It depends on the topic and the content and the purpose. There are many, depending on the topic, there are many valid reasons why a policymaker might wish to go in a different direction than what I have recommended. That doesn't mean, but in some cases, the policymaker is choosing an outcome that does not recognize or chooses to ignore or chooses to overrule facts and sense. And in those cases, I feel pretty strongly that it's important that as many people as possible understand what the true situation is. In the case of the Department of Energy coal and nuclear stuff and the notice of proposed rulemaking that followed, it became fairly clear quite quickly that the entire rest of the industry and the environmental organizations and natural gas and renewables and consumer groups and regulators. Everyone who basically wasn't in coal and nuclear understood what the issues were and joined me in believing that the Department of Energy management had reached the incorrect conclusions and was recommending a policy that was not in the interests of America.
And so do you look at this in the long haul then? So how does Alison go about, I mean, are you going to different conferences and knowing that there are going to be changes in overall in the administration to make sure that this message gets through?
I am going where I'm invited, and I am writing the occasional article that may or may not be invited, but is being very nicely reprinted, because I believe the longer term issue here is not just how do we treat coal and nuclear resources, and not just the reliability and resiliency of the grid, but as you heard me talk about this morning, we need to be looking very thoughtfully at energy reliability and resiliency from the point of view of the well-being of customers and the well-being of society as a whole. And in a world that is in a set of power systems and an economy that is increasingly threatened by climate change, by terrorists, by cyber attack, by all kinds of physical and economic and cyber threats, we need to be preparing for those in a much more thoughtful, long-term, proactive way than we have. And I think that requires not just rethinking the mix of power plants, but rethinking everything in our energy production, delivery, and consumption system, with the goal of protecting customers and their human well-being and physical and health and economic well-being and survivability, not just can we keep coal plants online.
Do you see, I'm not looking for a magic bullet, but are you looking for, are you seeing something or things out there that, boy, this really piques my curiosity, that you think this is an area that has a potential to make an impact, that is not being really looked at, or that is on your radar?
When you define the problem in the way that I have, long-term survivability and well-being of people, from an energy perspective, the single most beneficial, impactful, and cost-effective way that we can do that is highly energy efficient, good performing buildings and equipment and appliances. And what that means is better refrigerators that can survive a 3-day outage in Chicago in the middle of winter or in summer, so that they can keep people's water and medicine and food cold and safe, and buildings that can keep old people and babies from dying in extreme heat or cold, because we are going to be living in, it appears, relentlessly worse climate conditions for the foreseeable future, and for the unforeseeable future, which is even scarier. The other thing is that, given all of the evidence that 95+% of outages are caused by failures of transmission and distribution, not by failures of generation or fuel delivery, we need to be working much more aggressively at designing and operating transmission and distribution systems that do not fail, or that are designed deliberately to fail and be restored quickly. And part of what that means is we need far more things that fail gracefully and continue to perform regardless of whether they're performing in a way that is sort of managed and automated. But that points to the importance, both back to energy efficiency and to the importance of distributed generation, such as renewables, rooftop PV, distributed storage, things that keep individual homes, individual corners of the grid, individual feeders up far longer so that they can operate in spite of it. It also means we need to spend a lot more money on tree trimming. We need to put more thought into design and operation of electric systems that don't cause wildfires, or that can survive wildfires better, or that can announce there's a wildfire here, come fix it before it burns down a significant chunk of Montana or California. So those are very significant technology challenges and design challenges and thought challenges that we're not used to addressing.
So how do you choose with all this broad area, Alison? How do you choose the piece that you want to spend this finite? Let's say if we're talking about if life is or this particular one is finite in this sense. How are you choosing to spend your energy?
It kind of chooses me. Some issues are it's a function of what is the importance of the issue, what is my capability to contribute to it, and what is the need for me. Am I uniquely qualified or uniquely credentialed, or am I the only person who is thinking these things and saying them out loud? And plus, are there people who are willing to let me walk into their rooms and tell them these things? And so it's a combination of those. I don't work on issues I don't care about. I don't work on issues I'm not interested in. And I like to be able to make a difference. So all of these, I think, I've spent my career working on competition, on renewables, on smart grid, on transmission and distribution reliability. But through all of that, I think I'm now entering the next phase where it's saying this isn't just about stuff, it's about people and systems, and I am able to explain things. And so I think it's my role now to be the one who says, here is the bigger context, here's the bigger challenge, here are the ways that we can attack it.
Did you have female role models when you were growing up? I'm 69 this year, so I got a chance to go through this in the South. I don't know where you were. How did you get in? Because it's very obvious to me, Alison, that you're in your power, that you actually own your voice, and you don't, and that journey of how you got there. And I'm very interested in that.
I didn't have a lot of female role models. I came through at a time when there were very few women in the energy business, very few women in technical fields that I was interested in. I studied economics, political science, systems analysis, and this was in a time when women were not particularly listened to. And I was usually one of the few women in any organization who was not an administrative staffer. And one of the few role models I had was my mother, who was a model, who was managed an occupational therapy department, and was a model of clear thinking and get to the point and be results oriented. And so I made it my goal to always never do an analysis or a work product that my mother couldn't pick up and understand. Even though she had no technical background in the field that I was working in, if I could explain it and present it in a way that a smart person from another field could get, my job was satisfied. So, and I also learned from her, never back down from the right fight, and never let other people talk over you at the wrong time. So I learned not to never be a pushover. So, thanks,
wonderful.
Mom.
Yeah, what her first name?
Frances Silverstein.
Frances Silverstein. And then, so now have you seen, so now have you actually seen differences in having more women at the table? Have you heard the conversations change, evolve, benefit from this? Are you seeing the changes now?
There are still women tend to be concentrated in some portions of this industry more than others. There aren't a lot of women in oil and gas. There's far more in energy efficiency and energy service delivery, retail marketing kind of things. There are more women in transmission and distribution and classic utility functions, and there are more women in renewables. Still not so many, and more, although not enough, in academia. More women at the top of regulation, but it's highly variable, and I've always viewed part of my job is to support and mentor and give everybody challenges, because everybody, part of what you need to do to develop people is not just let them be good at what they're usually good at. You bring out a lot of the talent in people by saying, here's a challenge, rise to it. And let me call you out and celebrate you for that accomplishment, rather than, because if it's just doing the same old stuff over and over again, you always get the same suspects being noticed. So part of the opportunity and the mentorship and growth for people with whom you work is giving them new challenges, and saying, make something happen here. And many people are able to do fabulous things that we don't know what the end result should be, but they bring us fabulous end results. And that's a really good discovery means that I try to use.
It sounds like the difference between Newtonian, I'm setting a lump of coal on fire, or I'm releasing the energy that is in that exact same lump of coal, and your position releases that energy.
I try. Sometimes you don't know what it is you're looking for. A lot of times it's a bring me a rock, but sometimes you need to look for you need not to prejudge outcomes. You need to be open to discovering that the stuff that's inside what I think is this box is much bigger and broader and more interesting, and blows up the box completely because you were asking the wrong question or perceiving the wrong issue to start with. So I don't prejudge too quickly, and don't ask limiting things or walk in with too many limiting expectations.